So I probably shouldn't have exited. What I should have done is focused on the business, probably been quite happy with the business at the stage it was and not growing it. Go, okay, 30, 40 people. Actually, I'm just going to run it like this. Got amazing clients. I'm working with auto brands, booze brands. I probably should have been kind of maybe happy with my lot when I look back with hindsight.
Welcome to Agency in Motion, where we go behind the scenes of building, acquiring, and scaling modern agencies. Hosted by Tristan Pelligrino, this show is for agency founders, operators, and investors who want to grow smarter, structure better deals, and create lasting enterprise value. Let's get into it.
You build an agency and then you exit it. And I know you work with other agency founders now, right? And you're trying to help them navigate this crazy world that we decide to participate in as agency owners. Do you think most agency founders are building the business that they want, or are they just running the one that they have in front of them the best way that they know how?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think just stepping back slightly, my purpose now is to help agency founders avoid the mistakes and the scars that I got as an agency founder. That's my purpose in when I'm working with clients. And one of the key elements of that is the question you just asked, which is when you grow an agency, you start for a reason, right? You start with something in mind, which is usually you love the work, you want to do it your way, you got a passion for the industry. You know, if you didn't, you wouldn't start an agency, you'd go and do something else, right? So I think there's a real key reason why you do it. And especially when the founder's background is creative or strategic, then they have a real passion for the role that they play for clients. So I think it all kind of starts there. And then as you go through your journey and, you know, different time periods for different people, but let's say 3 to 5 years, and you grow, which you invariably will, I think founders lose sight of why they started the agency and default into, as you've said, running the agency and what's in front of them. But just hitting it day to day, short term, and not really thinking about how the business serves them professionally in the moment and then also for their future. My big bugbear with agency founders is, and it'd be interesting to see what you think on this, is everyone wants to exit with an M&A. Right? You ask anybody, any agency at any size, you know, what's the future look like? And the answer is, I think I want to exit with an M&A. And the problem with that is, again, you might correct me on this, but most agencies, not hazard, like 99%, never get to a point where they're attractive to M&A because they don't really have the rigor, the discipline. They haven't put the effort into building the business into something that's truly attractive to a buyer. And then of those that do exit, quite a lot actually aren't fulfilled by the exit. And the reason I say that is that was my journey. Right? Yeah. So, you know, that's a key component of it. And so there's this kind of misnomer that, you know, exit is the end game with a big upside in commercials. And then I go and retire, right? And there's so many problems with that. And so what I tend to like to work with founders is really going back to understanding, why are you doing this? Why do you get up in the morning and turn up and run an agency? What do you enjoy about it? What do you love about it? You know, the expression I use, I stole it from someone, is that, you know, this should feel more like Friday afternoon art class than Monday morning maths most of the time for a founder when you started a business. Right? And so you're really looking to get the essence of why did they do it and what did they do it for, and understand their psychology and motivation. And the reason this is so important is, if, like me, what you absolutely loved about running an agency was employing really talented people, giving them an amazing platform to do the best work of their careers, doing that great work that clients love and want to pay you for. If that's your motivation and that's what you get up every day to do, you have to realize that when you exit a company and sell it and cede control of that agency to someone else, that can be eradicated quite quickly in terms of you're not in control anymore. You're answerable to someone else who has a different kind of KPIs around the business. And that can really affect you. And I think not enough founders really think about what they love about what they do in an agency and why they get up in the morning. And the way you then think about how you run the agency, what the exit might be, if there is an exit, is completely different.
Why do you think agency founders lose sight of that?
So this might be a little bit controversial, but I think a lot of agency founders are very passionate about the craft and the product and what they do, but genuinely aren't very good business people, right? So
I don't
they
know if it's
really
that controversial, Steve, to be honest.
oh, there we go. I'm glad about that. Because of the background they're coming, like this is a agencies generally is quite a creative, kind of innovative business to be in. You're in professional services. You've got clients and everything else in terms of the dynamic that's going on there. And so I think a lot of founders just don't think about it as a business. They think about it as kind of a job, a role, or whatever else. And the number of founders who ask them, "Have you got a business plan?" I mean, 90% don't have a business plan. So if you're not planning where you're going, you're not running a business effectively. I find that founders a lot of the time are very emotionally driven, which is great when that's pointed in the right direction, but actually can be quite destructive when you're trying to run a business. So for me, I really want founders to think about, what is your role as a leader within an agency? Your role is to run a thriving business that serves you and the right people within that business. That's what you're there to do. Yet I don't think founders really take a step and plan enough what is and what that looks like. Rationally, from a business plan point of view, just the usual kind of elements that go within business plan. And then actually even emotionally in terms of what I was talking about earlier around their motivation for that business and what it wants to be. If you start a business, you're a founder of that business, you have an obligation, obviously, as a director in a business that's usually registered in some way legally. But you also have the freedom to run that business in a way that suits you because you're the founder. You own it, right?
Yeah.
So, as long as you do that responsibly and look after the people you're employing and things, I think that's fine.
So where were you on that spectrum of creative background, inspired by the work, and then really amazing business person? Like where did you fit along that spectrum?
I think I got some things right and some things wrong. I think on that specific point, I was a client service person, and I still think client services in agencies, although it became unpopular for a number of years, is a super, right? If you've got really strong, strategic, creative client service people who can build relationships with clients, get upstream of the problems, then that's an absolute super. And I understood that. So that was my background. And with that comes a certain amount of business acumen that you've got with it, because you're running, you're close to the business metrics, you're running forecasts, you're understanding the strategy and how it translates into actions for clients and things like that. So I think, that background helps when you then start an agency. But like I say, a lot of founders aren't client service people. They don't have that background. I also did a business degree, so I kind of had some elements of learning and theory from that. So I think there was a lot I got right in terms of I understood BD, business development. I understood forecasting, cash flow, commercials. I understood organizational structure and that kind of thing, which I think I kind of excelled at. But I also got a lot wrong in that my biggest lesson was I think I thought I knew more than I did. So I started my agency, I think I was about 32, 33. Mm-hmm. And, you don't know what you don't know. And there's a superpower there in terms of unconventional wisdom, challenging the status quo, doing things your way. But there's a lot of wisdom that you need, and I didn't have. So I think I made a lot of mistakes early doors through naivety and probably not asking for the right kind of help.
What was that big? I'm curious. You mentioned you made a lot of mistakes. What was the biggest one that jumps out at you that you thought you knew enough about that area, but it blindsided you a little bit?
I think probably I understood BD, business development. I've done a lot of, but I probably didn't appreciate the effort, the forensic nature of it, and the volume you needed to put through it to create a really healthy hobby. I think we learned that the hard way, especially as we grew. So I think early doors, For the first 5 years, we had investors. So we were being fed a little bit referral business, which was quite good. And then we had our network, we had people we knew. And I think when we started kicking on from sort of probably, upwards of 20, 30 people, that referral network can't sustain the growth that you're looking for. And we had bought ourselves out of the investment relationships. We weren't getting those referrals. And so I think that was a big lesson in that, we kind of had this massive kind of growth where we just couldn't stop lose a pitch, winning really, really nice business. And then we kind of plateaued off. And I think the biggest lesson was you need to keep the BD engine going. You've got to put numbers in it and forensically look at them, because they quite frankly do add up to growth at the end of it, a certain amount of clients at the end of it. So I think that was a big one. But the biggest lesson I had actually was going through the acquisition process, where I forgot how reliant the business was on me and my client relationships. So as we went through the acquisition process, I got quite excited. I really lent into it. Loved, we were getting acquired by a brand consultancy out of New York. So that was all quite sexy and dramatic. And I really lent into that process. So what I did is I brought in a senior client service director to kind of take over some of what I was doing with clients. And then I could really lean into the acquisition process because I was finding it exciting. I was learning. The biggest thing is that, that CSD, who was amazing, couldn't really build the relationships I already had with a lot of those clients. And you take your eye off the ball of the clients, and of course, then, the business can struggle and suffer. So that was definitely the biggest lesson. Anybody going through an M&A, you probably experience this all the time, is look after the asset.
Yeah.
Don't get too subsumed in the process and look after the asset. So BD, big one. You've got to look after those numbers. You're not going to grow if you don't look after BD. And then if you're going through an exit, make sure you're looking after the asset really carefully.
Yeah. And that's the thing, when you have a letter of intent in place, or even earlier with some interest, and you feel like the transaction is going down the right path, it's no time to take your foot off the gas pedal. You need to look after the asset and take care of it for sure. I 100% agree with that. And I've been on both sides of that. I exited with my business partner, and it's one of those things I learned like really quickly, because I actually wanted to buy out my partner, and it flipped actually at the end. So sometimes you don't even know how things are going to transpire. You've got to stay committed to building that business and protecting your downside too, because everything can fall through at the last minute. I talk to owners and founders all the time where they get to that final deadline, even a week within closing, everything's lined up, and it just falls through at the last mark. And that's tough, because then you got to pick things up and you have to keep moving forward. So
and it takes,
appreciate
you'll find this as well. It took a lot longer than you think as well. You think, the acquisition, maybe it's, 3 months or something like that. And I mean, from initial conversation to doing the deal, I think for us was probably 9-12 months.
Yeah.
From that initial conversation to actually all the paperwork going through. That's quite a period of time for a business to go through. A lot can happen in that time, especially if you're kind of subsumed by the acquisition process and not keeping your eye enough on the asset that you're selling, basically.
So Stephen, back to an earlier point you had, you mentioned that, a lot of agency owners and founders have this picture of an exit at the end, and that might not always be the route. But you did exit. So I'm wondering, along your journey, a decade plus, or it was almost 11 years, I think, when I was looking at it, at what point did you say, all right, now I am going to, pursue this path and exit, move on to something else? What did that spark look like on your side?
Yeah. So I think, like I said, we'd kind of had a really strong 3 years post. So we had 5 years of investors where we kind of did okay, but I think we were always held back a little bit by the investment relationship, if I'm honest. We then went independent, bought ourselves out. And then we had 3 years of real strong growth, amazing talent doing amazing work. Like I say, couldn't lose a pitch. We were just doing really, really well. And then we, as I was saying with the BD, we kind of hit this little plateau where we couldn't kind of break through the next phase of growth. And so we were sort of still, doing okay, doing great work. And I think at that point we were kind of going, oh, do we what's the best way to generate that growth? And at the time, if you remember, all the consultancy firms were buying agencies, Accenture being kind of the key component, they bought Fjord, Karmarama, ended up with Droga 5. They'd been really on that journey of, rather than just architecting, we want to build and put comms and brand into market. And so we kind of looked at going on and went, okay, well, that becomes quite interesting. So I think I can't remember a moment, but certainly Andrew and I, who's my business partner, we kind of saw we'd plateaued a little bit, wanted to really, drive more growth, really a bit for ourselves and maybe with a commercial mindset, which was a little bit naive, but also just for the people. We had some amazing people, some amazing clients, and we just wanted to do more great work for them, to be honest with you. And so we then engaged an M&A firm called Waypoint and Partners, who came in and helped us with that. And a guy called Miles Welch came in and originally, he's not there anymore, but just amazing, just transformed the way we looked at the business, how we structured the business to get us ready for an exit and that kind of thing. Worked with them probably for 6 to 12 months and then went to market and met lots of different people. Lots of people were interested in us. We were a social content agency. But what the magic sauce we had is social and content was the Wild West. It was kind of, people were just doing tons of stuff. Nobody really knew why they were doing it, what the results were. It was just kind of this way, a bit like, I would argue, a little bit of AI now for agencies and clients as well. There's a lot going on, but has anybody really worked out what's working really, really well? But what we were able to do is put sort of strategic and creative structure around it that gave blue chip clients the confidence that what they were doing was the right thing. They were spending the budget. So if the CEO goes, why have you done that? They'd have an answer. So we were very good at putting that structure around it in terms of what we were doing. So that was kind of our magic source really. And I've probably just lost the thread to the original question, which was the moment we decided to do the M&A and that process with Waypoint and Miles. So I don't think there was a moment. There was a process, a thought process we went through. And then we just were on that journey. And once you're on that journey, you're on that journey, right? And you're never going to kind of get off. But no, the key point was that we wanted, the way we did the deal and the partner we were looking for was a future for all of us. It wasn't make $1 million and exit, right? So, which a lot of exits can be. Obviously, there's always going to be an earn-out. But after the earn-out, the founders bugger off and, they've made their money. This was about a future for us. So the way everything we went into was finding a partner who enabled us to carry on the growth, carry on doing the great work, but that we would be part of that company as well and a future for us within it. It wasn't about the sale. So the whole structure of the deal, it wasn't a big upfront payment. It was a longer earn out and there were bonuses on performance and that kind of thing as well. But what we bought into was being part of something in the future that enabled us to release the potential in our people and for our clients, in essence. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, because I asked this to a lot of founders, like when you decide to start that process, to exit, were you running towards something and trying to achieve something, or were you almost running away from something? Does that make sense? Like, I wonder.
That's a great question. So both. So we've definitely plateaued, wanting to grow, as I said, right? But there was also an element of, we've been doing this for 10 years and we're exhausted, right? So we ran hot as an agency. And these are the scars I carry, right? But that we ran really, really hot as an agency with our staff and our team. We did a reunion actually a few years ago, and a lot of people turned up, which was great. And everybody kind of went, oh my God, that was the best work I've ever done in my career. Oh my God, it hurt. And so there's an element of pride in the work that we did, but also an element of, oh my God, we really did burn hot with people and didn't necessarily run things the right way, whereas I would recommend founders do it now. And I think we were part of the exit was to almost escape that a little bit. I probably haven't even thought this in great detail until you've asked this question, actually, but to escape that a little bit, that exhaustion, that reliance on just Andrew and I to run the business, find a new place where we could learn, where we could perhaps do things a little bit differently as well. So I think that's kind of interesting. Also, just being really candid, I think Andrew would agree. When you've worked with someone for 10 years, as a partner, you've exited with partners as well, I think. the relationship, it can get quite strained. And Andrew and I were friends before we started. And then, you have your ups and downs, and you have to realize that every agency, each of you will add different value at different times. But I think after 10 years, both of us were a little bit kind of maybe done with each other a little bit and needed something new, something to break up the relationship a little bit. And I think there was probably a factor in that. And ironically, now a good thing is Andrew and I are great friends again. When as probably in the final years of Gravity and then the move into Vivaldi, perhaps that relationship wasn't very healthy for either of us, to be honest with you. So I think there's purposeful drive towards something, but the driver being a few different kind of emotionally driven things within that. So
Yeah, and it's such a strong point when you have a business partner and you go on this agency journey. There's so many ups and downs, but I think that the point that you just made that I haven't really thought about, I've talked about it a little bit, but I think it was a good just thing to highlight where, one partner might have something completely different going on in their lives. It might be a low point, but then the agency might be at a high point. And then the other business founder and business partner might be going through something completely different where it's a high point in their personal life, and a high point in the agency where it's like there's so many different dynamics that often aren't aligned at the same time. And so it is that true roller coaster effect that you get when you're running an agency, especially with a business partner. And it's good that you found an opportunity to pursue an exit, run a process before maybe that relationship got so strained that maybe you're not able to salvage it afterward. And that's actually a good story on your side, because for me it's a little different. I started my first agency with a friend from college, and now we don't talk because there was just so much work that we did, and we just effectively said, we've kind of strained it so much that it's just not even really a friendship anymore, which is tough, because you grow it from literally nothing to, all of a sudden you look up and blink and you got 25 employees and you're supporting both families. You've had kids and it's a completely different thing than what you originally imagined. And it brings me back to really one of the first things you said, where a lot of agency owners are envisioning this exit as really their main, path or out of what they're doing. And if that's not the case, or if that doesn't often happen, like what are some of those alternatives maybe that you do have in mind, especially for the folks that you're working with now?
yeah, so well, I mean, a lot of agencies just get stuck, and I think founders get stuck in the business. You have commitments in life like your mortgage and your family, and you're running a business and it's doing okay, but you're not necessarily thriving within that business. And if you can't get it to a point where if exit is the objective, you can exit, then that can be really, really difficult. I think the way I look at it goes back to kind of what I was saying at the beginning, which is what is your motivations and why are you doing it? What do you love about it, right? Because if you cede control in an exit, then the things you love might be destroyed, and that might hurt in terms of doing. I think the second thing you need to think about is what lifestyle you want now and into the future. And I don't think agency founders think about this enough either. Everybody's going, I want money, I want a big payday, without really thinking, what is that what you need? Actually, you want to live comfortably now and within the lifestyle that you want now. And that can be sort of high end or lower end. I actually find with a lot of founders is that they're not greedy in wanting, to go and eat in Michelin-starred restaurants and drink Dom Perignon all the time. Their actual lifestyle needs are relatively modest, to be honest with you. So I think you need to think about now and the commitments you've got and how the business can serve that. And then I think you need to think about what, at the end of the day, what we all want is a comfortable retirement based on what comfort means to us personally, right? So, if you want to have yachts and fly first class around the world, then, that's a different strategy to actually, I want to be in nature. I want to spend time with my family and in my community, which is a relatively modest one where you're not going to need as much. But unless you're understanding what do I need to serve my retirement and a comfortable retirement, then you don't know the target you're aiming at. So if you try to take your motivation, your psychology, you take what do I need as a lifestyle now and what do I need in the future, then that's going to define the strategy for the business. that should define whether you exit, whether you don't exit, how you then can extract value from the business. Because, you can run a really well run business, run the right commercial ratios and everything else, and extract quite a lot of value from business tax efficiently and build an amazing retirement pot without an exit. Yeah. The one thing is, Tom at the Agency Adventure said to me, he said, so many agency founders run a business, exit the business, and the money they actually get from that whole process is less than if they've just worked in a bigger agency in a leadership team. So the irony in that is you think that exit is going to give you a big payday and you're going to earn all this money, but take that whole journey of 10 years I went on. Early days, you're not really paying yourself anything. First 6 months, probably zero. Then you start building momentum and you're paying yourself half of what you were. And at some point you start paying yourself good money, but you take that whole 10-year journey and plus the exit money you make, right? And then you add it together and then think, well, actually, I could have stayed at chemistry where I was and gone through the acquisition with Publicis and been part of that leadership team. Well, you might have made more money doing that, right? If that was your motivation. So I think there's kind of an element of thinking about, the motivation, the lifestyle, and then that directing the strategy. And I think that's very personal to each founder. One of the things you're finding more and more is lifestyle agencies. And I actually think lifestyle has a slightly negative connotation because I don't think anybody runs an agency as a lifestyle business. It's too hard. Professional services clients, the kind of the work, the change, the evolution, it's definitely not lifestyle and it's not easy. So we reframe it as a freestyle business where in essence, the business is working for you and you're working within it the way you want to. And we're finding more and more that agency founders have this realization that there's another option, which is that the business is going to serve you and the life you want rather than aiming for this kind of this big exit that you think that you should be having. And that's becoming more prevalent to us.
Yeah. And there's something I wanted to ask you, like there's kind of this notion that, you're serving your business, you're working hard, you're contributing, right, to the growth of the company. But I think, and it might have even been one of the things that you mentioned, a lot of owners and founders don't ask, what do I want to get from the business? Like, what is the business going to give me? And you don't really define that. So how do you work with folks now to maybe flip that narrative a little bit?
Yeah, so I start with the process I just spoke through there, really. So different agency founders want to start at different places. Some have problems, what I call burning hair problems they want to solve with value prop BD, and you work on. But what you're always kind of coming back to is talking to them about their psychology and their motivations for doing it, because they need to understand that better and they don't think carefully enough about it. Then, as I say, go on to what lifestyle are you looking to create now and into the future. It's a process. There's a diagnostics that we have for that. And then you're into the definition of the strategy. So, okay, if that's it, and we've got typologies within each that add up to, okay, this is the strategy you should have. It's never that linear, to be honest with you. It's never kind of you fit perfectly in any typology and here's the strategy. You have to work on that with the founder. But in essence, that's the process you're going through. Once you then have the strategy, your role becomes to keep the founder accountable to the activation of that strategy in line with the motivations and the lifestyle needs they have in essence. And that's kind of the operation. Now that sounds very rational. Actually, how that works is more kind of coaching methodology and a mentoring methodology than an advisory approach to. So, I've done some coaching courses and quite a lot of mentoring. And what you're trying to do is really get under the skin of the founder through questions and conversations to really understand what drives them, why they do it. And then, you're looking at lifestyle, that's actually quite a big moment for founders when they really have to look forward. Well, actually, what do I want in the future? What does my life look like in 10 years' time? It's quite an emotional and profound thing to go through. But they tend to come out of it with this clarity. 10 years away is a long way away, of course. And sometimes it's hard to predict and hard to eke that out. But once you've kind of got some direction in terms of your values and what you think is important in life and that kind of thing, then there's this clarity that they have and what they're aiming for. And they might move a little bit. But that's kind of how we operate. So motivation, psychology, lifestyle, strategy, keeping you honest through that process of implementing that strategy to that.
And so, like, how did you come to some of these conclusions where because you've made an exit. So I'm going to challenge you here, Stephen. You said, maybe exit isn't always the best route for folks, but you exited. So I'm wondering, since you've gone through that process, like what did it cost you maybe? If you had to go through it differently or think about it differently, what would be some of those things you would tell yourself,
Yeah, no,
let's say
absolutely.
5 years
Great
ago?
question. Um, I shouldn't have exited. I'm really clear on that now. I not at the time, didn't, wasn't self-aware enough, didn't really think enough about what drove me and what I was really, really interested in. So I probably shouldn't have exited. What I should have done is focused on the business, probably been quite happy with the business at the stage it was and not growing it. Go, okay, 30, 40 people. Actually, I'm just going to run it like this. Got amazing clients. I'm working with auto brands, booze brands, insurance brands, entertainment brands. The work we're doing is outstanding. The people I work with are some of the best people I've ever worked with. I probably should have been kind of maybe happy with my lot when I look back with hindsight. Yeah, was what I should have stayed, because I was very proud of the work we were doing, and I was very the people I had were amazing, and I probably didn't really understand that. Maybe the problems I spoke about in terms of the things that were going on in the business, plateauing, the relationships and things like the burning hot, I should have thought about them as individual problems and solved them in another way rather than defaulting to an exit. In terms of what it cost me, like I say, I don't say I made mistakes. I say I've got scars. Genuinely, I've got scars, of the process that we went through, and you know, the probably the biggest thing I lost was, we kind of got subsumed into the acquirer, and kind of became a service function to that business rather than standing on our own 2 feet. I mean, there's lots of decisions that got us there, which I was party to as well, to be completely honest. It wasn't I didn't have any say or control in that, but we ended up there. What it ended up doing was really the people, were suffering from it because we couldn't acquire the right clients. We weren't doing the right. People started leaving because they didn't want to be part of that future. What they joined was this thing, gravity thinking, and we were part of that. They didn't really buy into this future that Andrew and I envisioned Andrew and I had. They didn't want. And so, the people start suffering, the work starts suffering. And that's probably the hardest part and the biggest scar that I carry. And what I felt at the time was that I was responsible for everybody. That because Andrew and I had made the decision to do the deal and do the exit, that I then had to keep everybody happy. And that was a very painful and emotional process to go through, trying to, in essence, just keep people. I was just trying to keep people so that I could keep them employed, try and get to the point where we're doing great work again. And actually, again, hindsight's wonderful and you learn with wisdom. Actually, I should have just let those people go. It would have been better for them and better for me. And actually, I realized that through some coaching that I had post-acquisition, some life coaching I had, where, the epiphany was, why am I responsible for everybody? At what point do I become responsible for everybody? People choose to be here. People are responsible for themselves. So why did I have that sense of responsibility? And actually, I did. And I think that was a lesson and something that I found quite painful in terms of the process that I went through. And with post-acquisition, definitely.
Yeah, that's such a struggle, because I feel like a lot of owners and founders, you grow your agency, you grow a team, and these are the folks, especially your first agency experience, right? Like I just remember, the first one I grew over a decade, some of those folks are with you early stages and they're still there and they're still like part of the vision. And it was tough for me when our agency started to evolve to the point where we need to figure out what is that next phase. And it's hard to recognize that next phase isn't always right for everyone within your agency. And you can't be responsible for that as an owner because it's way too much. Especially when you had like 30, 40 people, Stephen, right? I mean, we were like 25 and there's just no way to have common ground with everyone at that level. And that's where this is my question for you, because you mentioned like you could have been just happy where the agency was. The one thing I've struggled with for decades is I get so much anxiety if the agency is stable. because I'm like, what am I missing? It should, I should be fixing problems, or I should be striving for more growth. Maybe I'm not taking advantage of an opportunity that's out there. Am I missing something, like where I would just get anxiety if it's not evolving? And that's kind of one of my big beliefs, is like an agency is this constantly evolving organism, right? It can never really um, just exist as is. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you wrestle with that?
Um, yeah, no, it's interesting in terms of it'd be really interesting to ask other people who went through this process their point of view, because I'm also conscious that time passes and you almost reinvent the past through what you learn and your wisdom, right?
Yeah.
So the story I'm telling, if you maybe spoke to Andrew or Martin, who was our ECD, or Jane, who was our sort of head of strategy, they might remember it quite different and prompt me to go, oh yeah, that's quite interesting from that point of view. But definitely, as I said, there was motivations behind it in terms of perhaps some issues we had. There was motivation behind it in terms of growth and thinking that was the right thing to do. Um, and I think that kind of probably that organic bit in terms of it standing still, I don't think I even just considered at that time. I think it was just you mentioned earlier, you're just moving forward the whole time, and you think
Mhm.
that growth is the right direction. I don't think I ever considered anything else. And had I probably could answer that question around that organic nature of the agency and the stability, whether that's right or wrong, a little bit better. But I don't think I've ever considered it enough.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting, I struggle with it, and um, I don't know if I've always handled it. It's like I never really sit still. It's not like I'm moving and going in a million directions, but it's like, all right, cool, take a breath. But now, let's capitalize on something in the market, or, is there some talent we can bring on to fill a gap? I'm just always looking for that next thing to position ourselves a little better. And sometimes it's hard to take that breath and just say, all right,
Yeah.
can we sit here and be happy with where we are at the moment, without always having to evolve. So it's just one of those things that I think is just part of agency life.
Yeah, it is. I met I met an agency. Well, kind of, I suppose, becoming friends with an agency founder who runs a sort of a purpose-led agents. Um, and I suppose you might call it unconventional wisdom. I don't know, but running an amazing business, about 10, 12 people, no desire to get much bigger, doing excellent work for purpose-driven organizations, charities, that kind of thing. 4-day week, 9 to 5:30. Right? They've literally created a business, like
Yeah.
smart business people. They've created a business where it can feed their lives because they don't want to be beholden to the business burning hot, like I said we were. And I just think, had I even considered at the time? No. Did I think that was an option? No. Maybe it wasn't at the time. I don't know. I think post-COVID things have changed. Oh, and they're fully remote as well. They've got no offices either. So, I think there's different ways of structuring an agency business so that it kind of it serves you better and in the right way, rather than the sort of traditional models. I love this unconventional wisdom. There was another agency I met where the founder had become the MD CEO and was miserable because he was a creative guy. He wanted to do work.
Yeah.
And, he was really kind of wise in that he realized and then brought in an MD and became the creative director. So he sort of said this natural transition you have as a founder to actually ending up being the main leader and the CEO, actually, I don't need to do that. So actually what I can do is bring resources in around me that can handle the stuff I'm not good at and I don't want to do and doesn't make me happy. And I'll focus on the value I can add and the stuff where I can thrive. And I think that's kind of an amazing thing. The number of agencies I meet where the founders become the CEO, yet might not be the right guy for the job or girl for the job, right? That's quite an interesting dynamic. So I think different ways of structuring agencies and thinking about it in an unconventional way to get to an outcome where you're thriving as a founder, I think is quite interesting.
Yeah. And that's probably where, I would like to ask you some final questions here, Stephen, because I think, there's this word that we've used in this conversation a few times. It's exit. And I think that's an interesting word, because I feel like, we deal with most of the agencies we're looking at from an acquisition standpoint. 500,000 revenue is really the lowest, but we're typically looking at $1 to $3 million revenue agencies. And at that point, I do feel like a lot of founders are thinking about an exit, right? They've built something that runs, perhaps they have some leadership in place, and they're trying to figure out, how do I exit? How do I eject from this thing? And I feel like that is maybe the wrong mindset in a lot of cases, because what I feel like M&A really is, at least from my perspective, if you're in this range of revenue, right, where you're not going to exit the private equity yet, it's really trying to find a partner, like your next partner, right? So you could transition out of the business, because at that level, you're never really going to truly exit, right? Because there's too much founder dependency, owner dependency at that point. And so I feel like that's that's a lot of the work that I'm trying to do is articulate the optionality that you can have as an agency owner. And one of those things might be what you just said. It might be finding a managing director to come in, take over operations and unlock me to do what my, zone of genius is, which is probably on that creative direction side. Maybe that's one route. Or maybe you do find a larger platform that you can join, where there are other resources that you can leverage, and you can find a better spot for yourself and maybe make the same amount of money and have performance incentives where you can make a whole lot more, but doing what you love. And I feel like a lot of founders I talk to in this range still aren't thinking in that way yet. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think the drive to exit, with the hindsight I have and wisdom I have now, is you're exiting because you want a commercial upside that you probably haven't thought enough about. You think money is going to bring you happiness and bring you freedom. And actually, a lot of founders you speak to who have successful exits, it doesn't. Without a plan post-exit, actually, you find a lot of exited founders start agencies again, right? Because once you've sold, you've lost your purpose. You've lost what you did, and you didn't replace it with anything. There's a great book, I think it's called Big Finish, which talks about exits and how you plan exits, and how founders who don't plan the next thing actually are quite miserable post-exit, whereas founders that plan the next thing are very happy and fulfilled from it. So I think there's kind of element there. And then there's kind of this element of escape, which I was talking about as well. So you've got, I want an upside, or I want to escape something. I feel stuck. I'm not happy. I'm not thriving. And both of those can be relevant drivers, and you can have a good exit from it. But I think you want to take a step back and think about, do I need the commercial upside? Is that going to be fulfilling, right? Everybody thinks money is the answer. Clearly, it's not necessarily. And then if I'm trying to escape, what am I trying to escape, and why? You might have just built an infrastructure around you and an agency around you that isn't serving you personally and helping you thrive, which you might solve in another way, not an exit. And the commercial thing, you might solve in another way, not an exit and an acquisition. So I think there's kind of different ways of looking at it. But I think we potentially just, again, it's only my frame of reference and experience and people I talk to. We rush towards the exit and the acquisition without really considering enough the other elements that play, and that we might end up in a better place not doing that and solving some of those issues that we have, or some of those motivations that we have, and making them, realizing them, I think is what I would suggest. And, there are successful exits, and there are great acquirers where it works, and there's happy stories as well. So that might be right for some people. It's definitely not right for a lot of the founders and clients that I talk to all the time.
Yeah. And what would you, final question for you, like what are some of the questions you would encourage founders to ask themselves early on when they're building an agency that can maybe help them prepare for these stages where, they're trying to figure out what that exit might be or that transition might be?
Yeah, I think it's tricky, because I think the early days, let's say years 0 to 3, you're just getting on with it. And I think, you you don't question it that much. Your motivations are probably pretty clear, even if not defined and whatnot. You're just kind of getting on with it. I think there just comes an inflection point, which will be different for different people, where you're just not as happy. You're just not thriving. You just feel a bit stuck. There's this moment that maybe is like a little bit of 1,000 cuts as well. There's no kind of instant. There comes a point at which you're feeling like that. And I think at that point, you want to go back and ask yourself, what are my motivations? What makes me happy? That kind of thing. And then, how am I trying to serve myself with this business? You've created this business, it should serve you and you should extract value from it. So I'm not sure there's, and what would the questions be? Why did I start this in the first place? Why do I get up in the morning? What are the things I enjoy? What are the things I don't enjoy? What lifestyle do I want, for my business? Because I think a lot of founders feel a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, quite long hours. And that might not be serving them either. They just think that's the way it should be done. So I think there's some sort of questions in there where you're just almost going back a little bit to why did you do it? Why do you do this? What do you need from this? And starting to work around those. And, there's no kind of, it doesn't change overnight, right? You work that out and you work through that. And then you start working towards the plan where you're going to be happy and you're going to thrive. I think that's the key thing.
Love it. And Stephen, where can agency founders and owners find you? Is it LinkedIn? Where are the best spots online to connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I love it or hate it. LinkedIn is a great place to connect with everyone. So I'm on there. I'm pretty active most of the time. So yeah, just search Stephen Firth. There's not many of us. Will come up. You'll recognize me because of the grey hair and beard. And reach out. And I'd love to connect with people if they're interested in chatting about some of this stuff.
Very nice. Yeah, I tell people the same thing. There's only like one Tristan Pelligrino on LinkedIn, and I'm the bald guy that pops up immediately when you're searching. So I'm with you there. And I got the gray to match you, Stephen. So
not quite as bad as I am. Do you know what? The funny thing being that I started going grey the point at which I started the agency.
Oh yeah.
So I think there's a correlation. I was kind of going grey, but then when I started the agency, I started going properly grey. So there's a lesson there.
Yeah, I always joke with folks. I don't know if it was my 3 kids or the agency life that caused me to lose all my hair and turn gray. I don't know. I can blame both sides of that. Either way, it happened. That's for sure. Well, Stephen, I appreciate the conversation. I'm glad we got this on the board and share it with folks. I think it'll help a lot of agency owners and founders, kind of hear these perspectives, right, as they're going through a lot of this. So many owners and founders are doing different things with their agencies, but there are so many common problems and issues that we all face. I feel like it's a good lesson learned here. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like I say, all you've got really is a frame of reference, which is your experience and knowledge that you've gathered over 30 years in agencies, and then a growth mindset to learn more and speak to people and understand more. And then you bring that to the table, right? And your frame of reference will be so different to my frame of reference, which will be different to somebody else's frame of reference. So I'm always very conscious and kind of caveat everything with, this is just my lived experience and growth mindset that I'm saying all of this. And other people have different perspectives, but it should be quite robust and relevant to a lot of people.
Yeah, well, appreciate it. Well, thanks for joining today, Stephen. It was a pleasure.
No worries. Thank you, Tristan.
Thanks for listening to Agency in Motion. For more episodes, insights, and our latest thinking on agency growth and acquisitions, visit aragon-holdings.com and subscribe to the newsletter. We'll see you next time.